The format of this session is inspired by the TED Talks format. So what we've done is reached out to some influencers and intelligent folks in Atlanta who are engaging in activist work, who are engaged in various intellectual projects, to imagine and practice, to put into practice equity solutions that they are here to share with us in a 5-minute presentation. So this is an experiment, but I'm hopeful that it will go quite well. So the question posed to them in this session called Atlanta in 5, what creative responses to today's urban inequities are Atlanta scholars and changemakers implementing on the ground? Presentations will showcase best practices, transformative strategies, innovative ideas, and research from a diverse range of perspectives and communities of practice. And I'm so very excited to bring our speakers up in turn, starting with Joe Hurley of Georgia State University. Unfortunately, in the interest of time, we can't read everybody's bio, but the description of everyone's work and background is on our website, racenatl.com. Please do consult that so you can learn more about our speakers. And with that, I'll turn the floor over to Joseph Hurley.
I'm Joe Hurley, and I'm glad to be here. So what I'm going to talk about today has kind of already been touched on, but I think I'm going to talk about it with perhaps a little more force and suggest that these are things that the city shouldn't be just like considering, or things that the city should be implementing and should have done a while ago. For much of the 20th century, the areas and the neighborhoods close to downtown and several of the neighborhoods along the Atlanta Beltline were poor areas. And now with the development of the Atlanta Beltline and the heightened interest in walkable areas, these neighborhoods are becoming increasingly desirable for people with higher incomes. So the question that I'd like to ask is, where will Atlanta's poor residents go now that their neighborhoods are desirable for wealthier people? So Atlanta has a long history of displacing its poorest residents. And as everyone, or as many people probably already know, because it's already been discussed, that in the 1960s, Mayor Ivan Allen Jr. suggested that Atlanta was a city too busy to hate. But as you can see from this photograph, by the 1980s, some of Atlanta's poor residents viewed Atlanta as a city too busy to care. So, in fact, since the 1950s, the city of Atlanta has actively tried to contain some of its poorest black populations and has displaced many of its poorest black populations. If you can. So what we're looking at right here is a map of Atlanta that is showing where the black population lived in the early 1950s. And so where you see orange and kind of pink, those are black residences. And if we overlay the highway system, you can see in red. So if you look at the east-west highway there, that is I-20, that was developed at around the same time that this map was created. You can see it attempted to serve as physical containment for African Americans on the west side. And actually, and so from the 1950s through the 1990s, the city actively displaced a lot of its poorest populations. And it did this through large development projects, such as the Atlanta Civic Center, Turner Field, and the Georgia World Congress Center, and many more. So if you look at the next slide, what you're looking at here, where you see the areas shaded in yellow, those were some of the poorest areas of the city, and those areas in yellow were completely demolished and later redeveloped not just through urban renewal, but through other projects in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And all of those, there's no affordable housing there anymore, or there's no affordable housing in any of those areas, and all of the poor residents there were displaced. So I would say that, fortunately now it seems, that bulldozing entire poor neighborhoods is generally unacceptable, although from last night's election, who knows what's acceptable and what's not. It seems like today, though, market forces are the driving force behind the displacement of poor residents. And even though it may be the market that is kind of causing neighborhoods such as Kirkwood to be unaffordable for the poor populations that once lived there, I would suggest that it is the city's inaction in implementing policies that encourage and require diverse housing options that is also leading to the displacement of the city's poor residents. So just from looking at this photograph, this nice image of Kirkwood, you can see that a lot of the houses are being displaced by larger kind of suburban style single family homes that are completely out of the reach of the poorer population. So I would say that Atlanta is still a city too busy to care. So what can be done, right? We're going to try to end on a positive, somewhat positive note and suggest some policies that should have already been enacted in the city. So one part of the solution to this complex problem is to implement policies that would be designed to safeguard the historic fabric of Atlanta's older and traditionally poor neighborhoods, such as, this is actually Pittsburgh. And so in the coming years, the Atlanta Beltline is going to open up just south of the neighborhood of Pittsburgh. So there's no question that gentrification is going to dramatically impact this neighborhood. So one way to lessen the negative impacts of gentrification is for the city to implement policies that make it extremely difficult and very expensive to demolish these smaller homes, and should also look at ways to not allow developers to consolidate parcels, so those two shotgun houses would be torn down and developed into a single-family home that no poor resident could afford. And finally, the city should look at ways to subsidize the rehabilitation of these smaller homes, and should require that with these subsidies that those smaller homes get either sold or rented to families of below certain income levels. This is things that other cities do. New Orleans has experimented with this, actually from a firm that is right here in Atlanta, started that project. So without policies like this, market-driven developers will continue to build, tear down the smaller housings that we have in the city and build large single-family homes that will be completely out of the reach of poor residents. We will lose housing diversity within the city, which will further push out the poorest populations, and what little Atlanta has left of its historic fabric will be further jeopardized. So if you're having trouble kind of looking beyond the boarded up state and condition of this shotgun house right there and think that really the best solution is just to tear it down, I want to end by with this next image that shows two shotgun houses in the neighborhood. That's actually inverted. That should actually say Summer Hill. Those two shotgun houses are in Summer Hill. I don't know the story, if they've received subsidies or whatnot. Probably they didn't. But I just want to suggest that we can retain the kind of historic fabric and the historic character of these neighborhoods, and we can provide housing options for different income levels, and we can kind of lessen or decrease the displacement of the poor through certain policies.
So I want to give you a little bit of an idea about the ideological background for this project. So I'm not a sports fan, but I'm struck by the idea that when I go or watch a game on television, and from one perspective, if the ball,
Okay, all right, so from one perspective, the ball that I'm looking at looks like it's in. And then they do something like an instant replay, and it's from another perspective, and all of a sudden, it looks out to me. Has anybody ever had that experience? And so it's probably part of the reason I'm a sociologist. Point of view matters, perspective matters, and things look different from when you consider a different perspective. And so part of the way that I look at gentrification is as a two-edged sword. It is good and it is bad. It has positive and it has negative impacts. And so I think that that is something that we need to consider. This project emerged from research that two collaborators at the University of South Carolina and I are doing. And we did a Photovoice project. And that Photovoice project invited 15 residents of the West End neighborhood. Those residents were selected by the neighborhood association. They came from diverse perspectives to come together and meet monthly. This was over a 6-month period. They would take pictures of the community, but more importantly, we would then come together to discuss the pictures and discuss what they meant. And it was only through those open conversations that the residents realized that many of them saw things in very different ways. So in the time I have remaining, I'm going to go quickly over some of those images. I've told you a little bit about our method. This project takes place in the West End neighborhood, about 2 miles from downtown. West End is a historically black neighborhood, or at least in recent years, but it's also lately been thought of as one of the hot neighborhoods, and so it's received a number of awards. When we would come together for those monthly meetings, part of the process also involved posting images onto social media sites and creating a conversation there. And the hashtags were given to the residents by us. This hashtag was, or this picture was in response to what challenges you in the neighborhood. This is a home on Lawton Street, and actually now that home is being improved. This was in response to what is unique about you. And one of the residents took this picture of the Hammond's House Museum, a museum that showcases African American art. What did we learn from this process, and what do I think that other communities can learn? The idea is that in cities like Atlanta, with our transportation problems, we are going to see an influx of people from a variety of backgrounds coming into the city, finding it an attractive place. What we learned, we talked about concepts like old versus new. And so go back to that idea that I first talked about what do you see? What do you see in this picture? I'll ask a couple of you. What do you see? Restoration. So you see something optimistic. A number of the residents said, I see the same old people doing the same thing. I see the same people being taxed over and over again with this responsibility. Neighboring was another thing that came out. And what residents told us, and this is actually something that echoed the dissertation work that I did a few years ago in the same neighborhood, is that the difference between people of a variety of racial and ethnic backgrounds and class backgrounds being successful in this community is, are you a front porch person or are you a back porch person? People who sit on the front porch talk to each other, right? They share information and they help each other out. And so they considered themselves, at least that focus group, considered themselves to be a group of intentional people who were working together to create community, to make sure that everybody who wanted to remain there could remain there. And then they were trying to build a collective sense of identity that recognized both its past as an in-town black neighborhood and recognize its even more distant past as an in-town neighborhood that was occupied by both blacks and whites. And so the end is this idea of hope. The residents were not foolish, but again, a picture tells 1,000 words. And so I suggest communities use tools like this to make sure that everyone has a voice and those multiple perspectives are heard. Change is unavoidable. We learned that last night. Right? Change is unavoidable, but displacement need not be. We might be, we've heard this a lot, a city too busy to hate. That's up for debate, but there's a difference between that and a place that's too busy to love. We need to love each other, and love listens. Thank you.
How we doing this afternoon? Excuse my voice. I forget that it's pneumonia weather, as my grandfather would say. But I'm at Spelman College in the AUC, and my work, for the most part, is social foundations of ed work. I'm originally from one of the greatest spaces on the planet, Chicago. Let's go Cubs, indeed. And I've been in Atlanta for 8 years. I've been at Spelman for 8 years as well, and it's been a blessing because I can definitely say that being in a chocolate space, my work is always able to build up a lather. You know what I'm saying? So in that, as I do my work, as I work with my people, my students at Spelman College for the most part, I'm always reminding them of the charge to what it is that they're brought into these spaces as they come in to become educators, as I'm teaching young folks who want to become teachers. But there's a phenomenon that I've been actually pondering over since about 2000. Now, there's a common song from, well, actually a common lyric, the MC, from the group Black Star, Respiration, when he talks about tearing the projects down and talks about spaces now being desirable, that we couldn't see that thing in the 80s. We couldn't necessarily see what it was that folks were getting ready to do within these spaces because they were deemed undesirable, in addition to the folks in these populations. And as I grew, one thing that I became aware of as I started teaching the Chicago public school system, one of the first years I taught was a 3rd grade class. So one of my students, I will never forget her name or her face. Her name was Risha. Risha was one of my best students, but for this one particular month when I was teaching 3rd grade, she had one of the worst academic performing periods of the time that I was her instructor. Couldn't figure out why. So one day she's at the pencil sharpener, and I'm looking out the window, she's looking out the window at the same time. And I'm looking across the expressway because I taught on 51st and Princeton, right off 9094. And what you could see is a wrecking ball. And that particular ball was going head in to one of the project buildings in the city that ran along Stateway. Now, if you know anything about the city, for the most part, from the 70s and the 80s, it was probably the most heavily populated space in terms of dealing with public housing. And she looked and she said, Mr. Benson, it was Mr. then, she said, look, you see right there, that building next to it? That's my building. They're going to tear it down in about 2 months. I was like, I'm like, well, this baby, she's thinking about what the next transition phase is going to be in her life, let alone, you know, me teaching her fractions, which I wasn't no damn good at nowhere. But that stayed with me. About 5 years later, back in the city, finished up the PhD, I'm congregating with some of my people around 39th and Cottage Grove. So we had just come from a conference, so we sitting outside talking about all of what it is that we going to do, changing the world and everything, articles we got to write, because we definitely want to publish, not perish. And in doing so, this brother walked up to me. I didn't know him from Adam. He was like, man, what's up, man? I was like, what's good? He was like, man, just passing through. Good to see y'all out here. He had a T-shirt on. And on his T-shirt it read, I miss my projects. I said, shit. I said, yeah, this city is up for grabs. It's been up for grabs. The lake is right there. Downtown is right here. If you live here, you can get to your job in about 10 minutes. You definitely don't want to come from the suburbs. And as this diagram shows, this reversal. Folk want to come back. The land is valuable. They don't see the people as being valuable. So now nationally what we have is a fight for the right to the city. It's a fight. So now we're talking about indigenous populations who have generational folk out of Detroit, Cleveland, Chicago, Philadelphia. Brooklyn's not affordable anymore. Definitely Baltimore, Seattle, San Fran, who can't live there anymore. DC, chocolate chip city now. Right? So in that, now we begin to ask critical questions. Who's at the front line of these battles? Well, if you know anything, and when I say anything, I mean anything about warfare with respect to urban space, when conglomerates merge, poor folk get hit first, right? School second. I'm not moving to a new space where I can't live and I can't put my baby in that particular school, so now the space has to become more opulent in order for me to be there. Yes, charter wars, yes. Thank God we defeated Amendment 1. You did? Because school closures are real. And now you want to know why folks are killing each other. Well, a good friend of mine named David Stovall at the University of Illinois at Chicago has coined a term, and I'm going to borrow it for this evening. That's how you engineer conflict to put folk in jail, right? So when that takes place, now I can justify all that I do. So now your project converts to a Bikram yoga studio. Your housing space now goes to a Starbucks, right? Or a parking lot, or, as we all know too well in this city, a damn stadium, right? So in that, I should have began with, I don't necessarily come to bring peace, I come to bring honesty and information. And in that, what we're looking at is a fight for survival of indigenous population within these spaces who damn well belong to be there. Now, how do we ensure this? Well, my work that I do at Spelman, one thing that it definitely does, it puts my students at Spelman outside of the gate, you know, the very manicured space in which we cut grass every day. On the other side of the gate, where the folk in the SWATs, for the most part, have to live, their babies over there. So I put them in these spaces in order to do community work to let them know one thing first and foremost, if they remember nothing else, don't be afraid of your people, all right? So I'm not going to do a Beltline talk because my two previous colleagues already did that. So take good notes, all right? But my solution is simple, but it's an old one. Kwame Ture, formerly Stokely Carmichael, before he died in the 1960s, pre-66 call for black power, he told folks one basic thing, and this was SNCC's mantra. Actually, the second one, the first one was no investigation, no right to speak. One major second one was organize. Organize, 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 right? So the solution starts with that. But before you organize, people be still. Be still. It ain't over. We're not going to die. We live through Reaganomics. All right? So that said, when you be still, remember and identify who your allies are. Okay? Because you want to go beyond advocacy. You want to become co-conspirators. Who going to jail with me? Who got the bail money? You did? That's the first thing. Second thing, remember that teaching, especially if you black and brown, it's a fugitive act. Let me repeat that. Teaching, especially if you are black and brown, is a fugitive act. If you think I'm lying, just look at a couple of things. Literature, for the most part, especially the work of James D. Anderson, Education of Blacks in the South, 1865 to 1930, and find out what happened to folks who were actually teaching other folks how to read, and what happened when you got caught. Amputation. So what you do is a fugitive act, but it's a political act. Teachers, those who work with young folks, stop being so damn afraid. Get into these spaces and give them what it is that they're going to need in order to be able to survive, but give them the truth. You can start with something as simple as, who was Columbus? Was he lost? What did he come here for? Right? So if you don't have courage, find courage. All right? The last thing that I'll leave you with, this activity that we engage in, yes, you here for the student, first and foremost, as teachers, okay? But the student, the school, your textbooks, your curriculum, all that apply for the most part, it must be challenged, but it sits in the context of a community. You are a part of a community, so as a teacher, you are a student and community advocate / co-conspirator. All right? So I know I'm over time, but I thank you for listening. And please, love each other and be well with what we do. Thank you.
So today I'm going to talk about a current research project that I'm involved with, looking at low-income neighborhoods. Yes, another Beltline study, but looking at the impact of the Beltline on communities. I'm just going to jump right in here. You've already seen this picture, actually, I think a moment ago, but essentially the Atlanta Beltline is transforming an old railroad corridor into a multi-use walking and biking paths that connects various neighborhoods and parks throughout Atlanta. Highlighted here in red. If you look over there on the right-hand side, highlighted in yellow, it's what's referred to as the East Side Trail. And this was really kind of the first fully invested section of the trail, as far as I'm aware of anyway. This is actually a depiction of the East Side Trail, so you can see people biking, jogging, walking, connecting through or winding through parks, and connecting people to green spaces for not only physical activity, but social activity. In August of 2017, coming up here in the summer, the Beltline is going to finish the next large segment of the Beltline Trail, which is going to be in the west side, or referred to as the West Side Trail. I'm going to highlight it down here. Sorry, this is a little bit off, but the green highlighted down here in the left-hand corridor is going to wind through some of Atlanta's historically poor, but also predominantly African-American neighborhoods. And if we zoom in here on the left-hand, on this West Side Trail, this is a closer view of this. So the green line is the actual trail running from Washington Park to Adair Park. And what we did was identify a half-mile buffer around the trail, around the West Side Trail. And from there, we randomly selected 400 households to conduct door-to-door interviews. So we hope this will provide pre-data in order to assess the impact of the Beltline on these communities. We'll be able to first provide a voice to the community members, not just in terms of the Beltline and its impact on their communities, but also their neighborhoods. And to the extent that they want to live in these neighborhoods, to the extent that these neighborhoods provide a place to age in place, and to the extent that they are afraid that they won't be able to do that. We're also collecting information on individual and community health, on health behaviors, and social activity and social cohesion. Again, all of the aims of hopefully being able to evaluate the impact of the Beltline on these communities. And potentially also document and assess the impact of the Beltline on gentrification, which we've heard about many times today. I'm going to come back to that point in a moment. So what the Atlanta Beltline potentially provides to communities is a large-scale community investment that can have impact on community health as well as health inequalities. And that's really kind of my angle that's a little bit different than what we've heard about today. My hammer is health and health inequality, so that's what I'm using here. What I'm interested in is how the Atlanta Beltline can improve the health of historically overlooked and underinvested neighborhoods, as well as what role might it play in reducing health inequalities. The Beltline and these such large-scale urban renewal projects or urban development projects can impact individual health by providing space for people to actually engage in physical activity. It can also impact social or community health by, again, providing space not just for physical activity, but social activities. And to the extent that these types of projects can improve individual and community health, it has the impact or has the potential to not only improve the health of historically poor and uninvested or underinvested neighborhoods, but actually reduce health inequalities by providing, again, access and space for individuals who are a part of communities who are historically overlooked. However, there's a countervailing force at play here, and that is unequal access through displacement. Right? We've heard of this referred to as gentrification, but this is what it is. It's unequal access to the potential benefits of these urban redevelopment projects for poor individuals, for people that reside in poor neighborhoods. And unequal access through displacement not only may temper the potential health benefits of these historically underserved communities, it may also prevent the potential reduction of health disparities, but it may actually exacerbate or magnify health disparities. Because what you're doing is you're pushing people out who need this type of space and these opportunities to engage in healthy behaviors, and you're replacing them with people who are already healthy, right? So just as the richer get richer and the poor get poorer, as wealth goes, so does health. And so it may not only the displacement may not only prevent the reduction of health inequalities on a large scale, which is really important. It's actually really rare that we see that. It's usually we target individual behaviors rather than changing the environment in which people live in. I would argue that it's only through sustained socio-political through sustained socio-political support, through policies and procedures that prevent displacement, that can finally individuals residing in lower income neighborhoods can benefit from these large scale projects, as well as potentially reduce health inequalities. Now, I actually didn't think specifically about what the solutions are, especially after what happened last night. I think I have to rethink everything in some ways. But I think there are 2 points, or I guess one main point I want to say, and that is when we think about health and health inequalities, oftentimes we develop policies that target the individual, try to improve or increase individual behaviors, their health, their dietary, their individual health, their individual exercise behaviors. But the fundamental causes of health and health inequalities are the broader social conditions of everyday life and the social policies that shape those conditions. So if we truly want to address health inequalities and health in poor neighborhoods, then we have to think about the neighborhoods in which people are residing in and the access they have to amenities such as the Beltline Project, so they can serve all members of the community and not just the relatively well-off.
My name is Mbanjai, and I'm here to talk about my app. It's called Legal Equalizer. It's an app I created I wish that I didn't have to create. It's dealing with encounters with law enforcement. So what is Legal Equalizer app? It's an app that I created. I'll go back to the story. It's about December 2014. It was right after we'd gotten the news that there was going to be no indictment on Mike Brown. And my Facebook feed was going back and forth from people saying he did it or he didn't do it. And the whole time I'm thinking, where's the video? Like, somebody doesn't have a cell phone to shoot a video of this? And so that month in December, DeKalb County Police Department and myself had encounters about 4 times when I was driving. You know, just random encounters. And I only got 1 ticket out of those, which got taken care of, but the 4th time was what really set me off. I'd gotten followed by the officer 3 miles, and when he finally pulled me over, he said I had a warrant for my arrest. Now, on my passenger seat was a ticket from the previous week from one of those encounters, and so I asked him, I was like, officer, there's nothing from the previous officer about a warrant for my arrest. And so he was like, well, the computers might have been down, it's a glitch in the system. I'm like, okay, go check it out, and I'll be fine. So then he asked me to step out of the car. He then proceeds to handcuff me and put me in the back of his car seat for 45 minutes. Didn't allow me to call my job or anything. So I felt like one of those fish in the catch and release pond. You just catch me and just let me go. Because I almost like, you're going to send me to jail? Just take me to jail instead. Like, at least make my waste of time worth something. And so we go to do a complaint about, you know, it was profiling. That's what it was, because he didn't have any reason to even pull me over. And he said it as much. And so we go to make a complaint. They tell us that profiling is legal and to do something about it. And so when I did get to work, my boss, who, nice man, but he was a 45-year-old white man, he was trying to tell me how to behave when the police pull over. And I'm like, Tracy, nah, bruh. Out of anybody in this office knows how to behave when the police pull him over, it's me. I mean, his first suggestion was, when I get pulled over, I step out of the car and I go say, hey, officer. I was like, whoa, buddy. Whoa, buddy, chill out. And so, so I decided, at that point, I was like, I need to show people what it looks like when I actually get pulled over and my behavior. I want this recorded. And so that's when I had the idea for the app. And so to add in the other aspects of the app, what the app does, I spoke with other people and parents. So the one thing they wanted to know is when somebody gets pulled over, they would like to have notification to their loved ones to let them know where they are. So what we have is we have a button that you hit, and it's going to send a message to 3 people ahead of time and let them know I've been pulled over, or I'm in a county police department. I'm currently okay. If you do not hear from me, please contact your local police department, and it tells them your exact location based on GPS. The next thing we did is we went and spoke to actual police officers and police departments, because I feel like we have to work with them. There's no way that we're going to win this if it's just us against you. You have to work with them. So they gave us a list of what to do when the police pull you over, from the minute you see the siren to, you know, whenever the encounter's over with. And so we put that on there, but then we also put things that you should put in there as far as your rights, your laws, your First, Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment rights we have on there as well. And reason being, when I was in college, long time ago, I feel bad for y'all, but it's not, I mean, I thought I felt bad in college, guys. I saw Bush get elected twice. That ain't nothing. I'm wishing for Bush. I'm wishing for Bush after last night, okay? But in college, I went to a predominantly white school outside of North Carolina, outside Charlotte, North Carolina, Davidson College, where Steph Curry, the best shooter in the world, went to, so y'all know that. And me and my group of students, we were, you know, young African-American men that thought we did a great job of getting to school and things like that. But about out of 10 times we go off campus, 4 to 5 of them we'd get pulled over sometimes. So after my sophomore year, in the middle of our sophomore year, we decided to go to the library and print out all the North Carolina state laws as well as local laws. So the next 3 times they pulled us over, we'd pull the law out and say, based on Mecklenburg County law, you need your sheriff and a warrant to come do that. So after that, guess what? They quit pulling us over because they recognized the car and they knew that we knew our rights at that point in time. So that's where we felt like the law was needed. Last but not least, we allow you to record the entire encounter, and you now can save that recording on the app where you can then send it to your loved ones, or you can go ahead and just play that video over again. So these are some of the examples we have here. Police encounter to the police car, free speech, Bill of Rights. So those are some of the things we have there. Now, what we really want to do is we want to expand these. Since I came out with the app and had that, we've seen too many of these unnecessary deaths and unnecessary situations of violence and brutality that could have been stopped. We want to add more laws to get into something as simple as, you know, local laws and things like that. We're going to have live stream able, so you can now live stream the app to your loved ones and to our website. And the next thing is I'm working with police departments, so I want to live stream the video to them. Because at this point in time, 82% of people that are getting killed by police either have some sort of mental illness or something with alcohol or drug abuse. So if you, instead of calling 911 and just saying, hey, somebody's acting crazy, if you have a video where they see that person's behavior, they're going to approach that situation in a different manner. So moving forward, guys, We're going to keep moving. If you guys have any questions, I'll be here afterwards. We do need, I know this is a law thing, so if you guys have any law or young law students that want to help provide laws for Georgia, local states, or things like that, we can add to the app because, once again, it is going to be geographically based. Thank you very much. It's right now, it's already out on the App Store, so if you're iOS, it's called Legal Equalizer. It's out there. Android, it's out, but we're doing the update for the Android today. So that's going to be updated and getting back to full function by tomorrow morning as well. So.
So today I'm going to be talking about how I see my students in the AUC. And AUC, for those of you who don't know, are Spelman, Morehouse, Clark Atlanta students, how they're using Twitter to disrupt the status quo and imagine new futures. So, this is a tough time, a tough day. I woke up not having slept a lot and feeling really down. But reviewing my notes for this talk, I became inspired by the ways that my students are organizing. And so that's what pushes me through this conversation, which will basically be a love letter to my students and Atlanta students in general who are leading movements that seek to disrupt the status quo. So this work of liberation, as we know, requires the overthrow of politics as usual and demands our radical imaginations, our ability to imagine alternative ways of living and governing ourselves. And according to my students, Twitter is an important tool to organize, analyze, build communities, and do just this, imagine radical futures. So the group AUC Shut It Down is a coalition of AUC students. And what I love about Twitter is that we have this archive of hashtags that we can go back and look at, right? And so AUC Shut It Down is this coalition. They've joined forces with larger movements such as ATL is Ready, right? Groups of student-led organizations who are taking leadership roles in shutting down politics as usual. We know that after the extrajudicial murders of unarmed citizens, students took to the streets to shut down the streets of downtown Atlanta in solidarity with protests across the country, the kind of civil disobedience that we see marking this time. So for these students, traffic should not flow as usual while citizens are being murdered by police, right? And for me, too, it's thinking about how hashtags can connect people to actions, locations, so it's a place to know what's happening, but also creates, as I said, this archive, an alternative way to put one's grievances and demands on the public record. So last October, AUC Shut It Down students organized, right, to protest and make their demands heard at the Hillary Clinton rally at Clark Atlanta. They were told now's not the time, right? And their response is, we will wait no more. And I want us to do something today is thank a young black organizer and activist today, right? Because let's be clear that without these kinds of protests, without this kind of shutting it down, the Democratic Party candidates would not have directly addressed and engaged Black Lives Matter in the way that they did. So thank a black young activist today. So some of these actions that I see directly from students in the AUC, some of these are hashtags that you can follow to see some of the photographs and also declarations that they put forth on Twitter. So their demands, their declarations, the essence of what it is that they're organizing and what they want, right? So Black Brunch ATL, many of you saw students shutting down business as usual in the leisurely time of brunch on Saturdays and Sundays, demanding that Black Lives Matter while people were enjoying their brunch, right? So you can see videos of this if you look at that hashtag. They proclaimed, it is our duty to fight, it is our duty to win. Stand up if you believe that Black Lives Matter. Potties and Policy is a recent action taken by AUC Shut It Down members who made several demands, one being gender-neutral bathrooms in every building on campus. Another is that professors must include a page in syllabi on gender-inclusive language. So these kinds of actions and also demands are under these hashtags, and I encourage you to look at them. And the last that I want to just briefly point out is the unfortunate raped at Spelman hashtag. A series of tweets under this hashtag detailing the rape of an anonymous student who was a freshman at the time by 4 Morehouse students. And this action, and we see in the photos that I've added here, we see Spelman and Morehouse students shutting it down. So they're on the steps in the larger image here of the provost office on campus, right? So these tweets, because of these tweets, there was attention brought to this issue that happens more than it should, right? This issue that happens with regularity on college campuses. So as a result, there's a creation of a campus climate task force at Morehouse, and because these tweets went viral, the administration could not deny or reject what was happening, right? So in this way, we see, again, students using Twitter to put their issues on the table, to expose things that some in the administration would rather hide. So I'm teaching a course called Black Twitter currently. And in this space, I've been able to think about with my students how, what Black Twitter is, first of all, the space of creating community and solidarity and awareness, but also helping students think about how they can use the technology that they use every day already in new ways, right? We can use this technology to create the kinds of worlds that we want, or at least come together and think about the types of self-governing, right? The new forms of governance that we demand. So part of Black Twitter is also to think about digital diasporas and Pan-African solidarity. And I want to borrow here from part of a tweet that I saw from the AUC Shut It Down, right? And they write, quote, "We have committed our efforts to the development, cohesion, and liberation of all members of the African diaspora." So students in this way are really taking up this effort to create Pan-African solidarity, so beyond the borders of the US nation state, thinking in very anti-colonial ways about what power and resistance looks like. So for me, thinking about the use of Twitter, or rather Black Twitter, as a space that Black people create using a form that was not meant for them, has me thinking about Ruha Benjamin, sociologist and Spelman alum, on this difference between rewriting code and code switching. She writes, quote, "When we rewrite code rather than simply code switch, it becomes possible to embed new values and new social relations in the world." Right? This is, instead of inserting ourselves into systems as they stand, we want to disrupt them, and we want to create new systems and forms. So this is what it means to hack systems of power. Oops. So to conclude, and I love this hashtag Fund Black Future, which really comes out of a Chicago youth movement, is thinking about the ways that there should be money attached to some of these programs that are emerging out of Black youth politics, right? And for me, it's a time of a new abolitionist movement. This is what my students are showing me, that it's abolition and not reform that they demand. There's this intersectional, again, an anti-imperial politics. So it is making a solidarity, looking at Black movements in places like Honduras and Colombia, seeing what's happening on the African continent, connecting across national borders, right? These are the ways that Twitter becomes an important tool for this resistance. And it's also a site of unlearning and critical analysis, right? Rethinking politics as usual, rethinking older models where gender and sexuality were not centered. And then lastly, my students are using Twitter to organize around this issue of gentrification in the West End. And what I think is important is that they're taking to task their own institutions in their complicity in the underdevelopment of the West End. As the AUC Shut It Down students write, the AUC is comprised of privileged intellectuals who enjoy the comforts of security, access to resources, yet the surrounding West End exists in a condition of depravity and exploitation. So we're thinking then about how to imagine radical futures. I ask this question a lot of my students. What does a radical liberatory future look like? I simply don't think we have enough space, or that we're giving our students enough space to imagine and think about what this is. Right? What are the kinds of structures that people want in these new ways of living? So for me, AUC students are shutting it down and doing the work of imagining and building new realities. And Twitter, then, is an important tool in this work. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hello. I want to start by framing this political moment that we're in. Some things happened last night in this country. Yeah. If you were brave enough to watch TV all night, then what you saw was the South covered in red, right? What you saw in the middle of that was a tiny little drop of blue, and that's Atlanta. Atlanta is very much, at this moment, an island in the sea of red. Now, I don't want to confuse you. That does not make us an oasis. We are but an island, right? And that means that we have work to do. That means that what Atlanta chooses to do in the next 4 years will mean the world to the South. And that is very important for us to keep in mind. So with that, let's get into it. So, rethinking justice in Atlanta. We've heard a lot of great things and terrible things about Atlanta, right? We've heard that Atlanta has the largest wealth gap in the country, right? So that means that the gap between the rich and the poor is the largest of any major city in this country. What we also heard is that Atlanta's apparently a city that's too busy to hate, right? Or as some people say, too busy to care. So I want to just show you what our city jail looks like right now. So right now, of the quality of life offenses, and I could do an entire 30 minutes on where those quality of life offenses come from, slavery, right? But I don't have 30 minutes, so I'm not going to do that. Right now, these are the top quality of life offenses in ACDC, Atlanta City Detention Center, right? The blue is black folks. The blue is black folks. These are the folks who are getting arrested for quality of life offenses and who are being sent to the jail. The red is white folks. It's about 10%. The white is everyone else. Everyone else. Let's not confuse ourselves. Atlanta is not just white and black, right? So that's everyone else. So we have a problem here. It's a pretty big one. This quote comes from a resident of Atlanta. She's a really dope human being. She also comes from an immigrant family. So she says, "My dad is a loving and sensitive man who struggles with addiction." She says that we've begged the police to get him into a treatment facility for mental health and addiction, but we're told that there's no services for people like my dad. How many folks have heard that before? The only response seems to be jail. And each time he's locked up, he comes out even worse than he was before. I'm just going to go back for a second. So let's look at some of these offenses. Criminal trespass. What does that mean? That means you are somewhere where you're not supposed to be. That means you are black and somewhere where you're not supposed to be. That means you are poor and somewhere where you're not supposed to be. What about defecating and urinating in public? What does that mean? That means you don't have a home and you're somewhere where you're not supposed to be. Right, let's look at just one more. Disorderly conduct, that's my favorite one. Disorderly conduct, for those who are lawyers in the room, can mean anything. Anything. It could mean cussing. It could mean crossing the street and hopping outside of the lines. It could mean looking like you're crazy. And who gets to define what that means, right? Anybody. So, once you get in jail for these quality of life offenses, you generally are black, you're poor, you have mental health issues, you have addiction issues. You're staying in jail for really, really violent things like pedestrian violations. Those are very scary offenses, y'all. Now, the average stay in ACDC right now is 17 days. However, if you get in jail for something like crossing the street, right? And I just want to make sure folks know what that means. When we say crossing the street, we're talking black people, we're talking specifically black transgender people, we're talking Midtown between 8th and 12th, right? We're talking folks who are being profiled for sex work, just to be clear. So you're going to land in jail for almost a month. For almost a month. What's going to happen during that time is you're going to lose your job, if you have one. You're going to lose your housing. If you're on medication, you're going to go off of that, right? If you have a substance issue, that's going to get worse, right? So what do we do? What do we do with this issue? Well, one of the things that we do is we stop trying to arrest our way out of the problem, right? I'm not going to read this quote, but it's an incredible one by Councilmember Kwanzaa Hall. And it basically says that we cannot arrest our way out of poverty in Atlanta. We cannot arrest our way out of racism in Atlanta, right? So what do we need to do instead? Because these offenses are still on the books, and until they get repealed, and hopefully they do next year, there's still things that are illegal to do in the city, right? So what we do is we create a new thing. We create the Pre-Reg Diversion Initiative. This is the first initiative to launch in a major city in the South. It is the 4th initiative to launch in this country, and it will launch next year right here in Midtown and downtown. What this initiative, yes, let's clap for that. It's a big deal. So what this initiative will do is it will say, we're no longer arresting people for being poor, for having a mental health issue, for having an addiction issue, for doing survival sex work. We're no longer arresting you because we know it doesn't work, because we know that Atlanta has an 86% recidivism rate. That means 86% of the people who touch the system will go back into the system. That is 40%, almost double the national average. That is double the national average. So what that tells us is that not only is that not working, but it's costing the city a lot of money, right? It's costing us a lot of money, it's costing us a lot of time, and it's ruining people's lives, just to be really frank, right? So this initiative works like this. An officer approaches someone. That officer has been trained in harm reduction. That officer has been trained in mental health. They've gone through a crisis intervention training. That officer notices that someone is maybe having a mental health issue. Maybe they know them because they see them on the block every day, right? And that officer is going to make a judgment call, just like the officer would make a call as to whether or not to arrest someone, right? The officer will make a call and say, hey, it seems like maybe you could use some help. It seems like maybe putting you in jail isn't going to solve your addiction issue. Right? So what we're going to do instead is refer you into this program, which has a few key goals. Reduce the number of people in jail, period. Reorient attitudes and responses. So we really need to change the script, right? We need to really re-understand what we mean when we say addiction. We need to stop blaming people for their addictions. We need to stop blaming people for being poor, right? We need to improve public safety and public health. We know that these services don't exist in Atlanta in the way that we want to. So part of the Pre-Reg Diversion Initiative is putting funding into things like homelessness, into homeless shelters, putting funding into things like addiction services, into crisis intervention drug treatment facilities, into job placement. Right? We want to strengthen the social service infrastructure so that service providers can talk to each other. Hey, I have a client. The client's not really eligible for any of these shelters because maybe the client is transgender and isn't safe in the men's shelter, right? The client maybe has a long-term drug problem and really needs a drug treatment bed, but they're also looking for a job. Right? People are complicated, which means they need more than one service at once. Reinvest all the money that we save from not putting people in jail and put that back into social services, right? So this initiative first launched in Seattle in 2011. In the first year alone, Seattle saw a 60% reduction in recidivism, 60% in the first year. In the first 2 years, they spent 47% less money per person that they were then able to reinvest into services. That's a big deal, y'all. So, here are some of the ways that we want to see services happen in this city. We want people to be able to access housing if they want it. We want people to be able to get better, which means that getting better means that sometimes you relapse, right? How many folks have tried to quit smoking? Show of hands. Ever, right? Did you stop on the first try? No. The second try? No. People generally take 7 times to stop smoking. That's what the numbers show us. So how many times do you think it would take for someone who has a heroin addiction for 40 years, right? Harm reduction. Intensive guerrilla case management. That means that care navigators come out to the streets and talk to clients there. They don't expect you to make your way down to 5 Points, right? They don't expect you to make your way down to Midtown. They come to you. Peer-to-peer advocacy, this just means that regular people talk to each other. Culturally competent care. This means that we train our service providers in systemic racism, right? We train them in transphobia. We train them to understand that people are oppressed systemically, and so they're scared. When they come to service providers, we're scared, right? And then lastly, trauma-informed care, right? People who are poor are not poor on accident. They are poor because we live in a city that systemically divides people who have money and people who do not have money, and that's on purpose. I know I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna speed through these. So, I think that one of the most important parts of pre-arrest diversion that I just want to leave you all with is that this is one of those initiatives that was won by regular people. Some of those people are in this room right now. I won't call you out. It's one of those things that was designed by formerly incarcerated people. It was one of those things that was dreamt up by people who experienced the system. So this quote comes from someone who helped to design this initiative that will launch here next year. And I just want to read it. If pre-arrest diversion had been around when I was going in and out of jail, I would have never gone back in. I would have been able to get the help I needed to get back on my feet. We need this in this city yesterday. Thank you.